So I want to thank everybody for making the effort today to help us celebrate this great event for all of us. This is the first time we've all been together in the last 25 years, and each team member will come up and talk about maybe a little bit about what the expedition meant to them or the influence of that, and maybe some of us will talk about the changing climate that we observed, since a number of us have been eyewitnesses to the changes of climate. The climate in the north has totally changed in the last 25 years, which we'll cover more.
And we too out there in the sea, I saw traveling along this curving arc of white that seemed endless and eternal, but in fact, in the 25 years since then, in the many journeys that all of us have taken back to the Arctic, we have watched that endless and eternal arc of white melt away literally before our eyes. As Will has shared so powerfully through his global warming initiatives, the numbers are out there, the evidence is clear. We've watched the Arctic Ocean melt away. Some 30% of the summer sea ice has diminished in 30 years. The average summer temperature in the Arctic Ocean has increased over 10 degrees in those same 30 years. The Arctic Ocean, in fact, is the canary in the coal mine. It's what's coming our way in the years ahead. The Arctic Ocean and all the areas north of the Arctic Circle are changing twice as fast as the rest of the planet with the impacts of climate change. So what's going on there is all headed here in the future. All of us need to share with the young people of the next generation the opportunity to retool our planet and retool our world. And I thank Will for taking such a huge initiative with his organization to lead the charge in that for many of us and inspire us to make that a cause that came in the wake of the project we all shared here together. Thank you for being with us here tonight.
As Will said, I've spent, since this expedition 25 years ago really launched me into the Arctic, and I've been spent a lot of time up there since. I especially actually on the Arctic Ocean and going to the North Pole. I've trekked 7 times to the North Pole. I've spent more than 600 days and nights trekking around on the Arctic Ocean. And it's just shocking. I basically pinch myself because it's not the same place as it was 25 years ago. We could not do this expedition today for the simple reason that Paul navigated with a sextant, and to navigate with a sextant you need the sun. And nowadays in April there's almost no sun because it's so much warmer and there's so much more open water and there's so much moisture going into the air, and there is no sun. You can go for days, even weeks, without seeing the sun, so you simply couldn't navigate. If for no other reason you can't navigate your way to the North Pole, you couldn't use a sextant and go to the North Pole. But the ice is completely different. It's so much thinner. There's the ice, the function of the Arctic Ocean pushes the ice up against the coast of northern Canada, and that ice used to be 5 to 25 years old on the average. We called it old ice, old Canadian ice. This past year I went to the North Pole, and I would ski all day, and I would hardly see any old ice. It's all new ice. It's so thin and so fragile, and it's shrinking so quickly that it's unbelievable.
I now live in a place called Cambridge Bay. It's about 1,400 people. It's up on Victoria Island. It's north of the Arctic Circle. It's farther north than Iqaluit, where I lived for 20 years. And when we all got together, that's where I lived. And I actually moved farther north because I was concerned about how warm the weather was getting, how the flow edge was retreating. Flow edge is the area where the sea ice that's stuck to the land meets the open sea. And when I first moved to Iqaluit in 1975, it was about an 80-mile, 90-mile drive to the flow edge. By the time I thought of leaving, it was about 40 miles. And now, over the last 15 years since I've been gone, it's been creeping closer and closer to Iqaluit, and it's down to about 20 miles now. And of course, that's the platform for a lot of the animals and also platform for travel. I was up on a wooden sailboat a year ago at this time, last year, and in that area of Pernavik, which is up at 73 degrees, very high up in the north, in the 1980s, they used to have 11 months, or no, more realistic, 10 months of dog sledding, 2 months of boating. They now have 11 months of boating and 1 month of dog sledding. And I actually have a real concern for the dogs. I'm a dog guy for many years. I ran a team, and they're losing their dogs there because it doesn't make sense to keep dogs if you can't run them.
I kind of come, at this climate change thing from the wildlife aspect, and like I say, I live in Barrow. It's as far north as you can get, right up on the Arctic Ocean, and and we've seen tremendous changes in the sea ice. Where I don't know if any of you remember, but boy, back in the early '90s, we had a bunch of somewhat retarded gray whales get stuck in the ice up there, and it was an amazing project and media circus for a long time to get those whales unstuck from the ice and back out into the Arctic Ocean so they could migrate back south. But the amazing thing is that was the first week in October, and the sea ice had already formed a pressure ridge. This back ice had already smashed in against the landfast ice and created a big pressure ridge that caught those whales in there. And that was the first week in October. We have open water till nearly Christmas now, and that ocean. And it's just, a dramatic difference. I don't know. Climate change might be subtle someplace, but it's about as subtle as a kick in the head up there. It's quite obvious. And what we're seeing with the wildlife is, I think you hear quite a bit about polar bears. They're kind of the poster child in this. They're losing their platform, and it's bad for the polar bears, but I think the ones that are really getting hit are the walruses. They're very dependent on the sea ice, and we're seeing situations where the summer sea ice is receding farther and farther every year. It's 30% less. It's just remarkable how fast it's moved out, and the sea ice will be hundreds of miles offshore in the summer, where it used to be fairly close. And the way walruses always worked it is they used the ice platform as a raft, and they would ride the raft, and it was usually over pretty shallow water, and they could dive off and eat clams. And now that ice is so far out there and such deep water, they can't use it that way anymore. And so we're seeing tens of thousands of walruses haul up on land, in places where we've never seen them before. And the other one I'm more directly associated with are reindeer and caribou. That's kind of my job now as I look after the land mammals, like caribou and moose and muskox and those. And worldwide, the reindeer and caribou populations have declined about 50%, in the last 10 to 15 years. A big change. And the largest herd that I work with is called the Western Arctic caribou herd. And it's numbered up to, 500,000 caribou in that herd. And we, in 1 year, 1993, we counted 490,000 caribou in that herd, and we went back in 3 years later and we counted 373,000. We lost over 100,000 caribou. And what happens with these land mammals is that, caribou are kind of the premier large Arctic mammal, and they spend the whole winter digging through the snow to get to their food, and it's getting so almost every winter anymore, there's some period in the middle of the winter it gets above freezing, and a lot of times it even rains. It all freezes over again, so the rest of the winter those poor animals are out there trying to get through the ice, and even if it's not a total barrier and doesn't just kill them outright, it's a lot more work all winter, and they just run out of food reserves, and they don't make it through the winter. So, it's a very real issue, and it's very hard on the wildlife in a lot of cases. So,
I'm not an expert on global climate change, but I did have an opportunity to observe the Gulf oil spill up close and personal where I work in New Orleans, and it's really amazing, how fragile our environment is, and it doesn't really take much to small mistakes here and there can snowball and really impact us. So we all need to think about that.
Anne spoke a number of times about the top of the world. I'm from the bottom of the world. I'm from the Antipodes, I'm from New Zealand, and climate change, global warming is having a huge impact at the bottom of the world. I went to Antarctica in 1969 and I spent 13 months. I had the privilege in 1969 measuring this river. The river it started off with about 3 inches of the water, just a trickle. The river was called the Onyx, and then it became 1 foot wide, and it reached its peak at about 3 feet wide. And we measured it. It was the first ever river recorded in Antarctica. A friend of mine came back from Antarctica about 5 months ago, and he was saying that now a flood, it's more than 100 feet wide. So from 1969 to early 1970, this river had just gone from being just a trickle to being almost a flood. Not quite the Mississippi we paddled down today, but it's indicative of what's happening with climate change, with global warming at the bottom of the world. And I think we need to be conscious of this. At the moment, I'm working in Sri Lanka. I think one of the things about the North Pole expedition for me was I felt that the Arctic was in good hands. There were very good people working in the north. And I ended up in Afghanistan in the early 90s. I spent 3 years in Afghanistan, where I've been dealing with politics, people, but also if you look at the great mountain ranges of the world, such as the Hindu Kush, which is in Afghanistan, the Karakoram, the Tian Shans, the Himalayas. I've worked in all these countries off and on for more than 35 years, and I'm just seeing a huge change in terms of a snowflake falls in the Himalayas, and the effect of that snowflake you can feel a year later in the Bay of Bengal, where you have people who are having to leave their islands because the island that they live on is totally inundated by water. The Bengal tigers, the tigers which live in the delta areas, are now attacking people. Their main diet is human beings. 10 years ago, it was fish and it was other animals. And so what you're seeing happening in the world as a result of climate change, you're seeing marginalized people competing with marginalized animals. Last year in Sri Lanka, 89 people were killed because as the people get pushed out into remote areas, so do the elephants get pushed out as people continue illegal logging, as the ocean warms up, people in the delta areas and the coastal areas get pushed inland. So you start seeing marginalized animals and marginalized people being the victims of climate change.
The most abundant and most precious resource still is out there in great abundance, and that is the human mind. Because if we can imagine a new world, we can create one.
Thank you.